can't refute that I know what I'm talking about, because I'm doing it in your form. But I'm going to tell you what y'all are doing to us. And I think this poem really resonates even today when you look at these people who are, arming up against all of us who don't look like them. I don't know all their names, QAnon and all the rest of them. I don't learn all of their names, but we are against the same sort of packs, cowardly packs that Claude McKay was talking about. And so, yeah, that struggle is one that we are still dealing with today.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Jones. All right. Anybody else want to chime in? Taman? Uh,
Yeah, I would say definitely too when we're looking at poems that talk about this struggle or protest, that a lot of the appeals that are being made, like Ashley mentioned, are still being made today. And there are different themes that I feel like are expressed in this poem and are expressed in a lot of poems that deal with freedom struggle, such as death. That's something that is dealt with here. If we must die, right? I instantly thought to Zora Howard's work, Won't Die Things. And then another one was Keto Fortunes, When They Shoot Me in the Street. And both of these poems deal with death in a certain way that also talks about resilience and this fight and this idea for revolution that isn't necessarily absent of that part of it, right? Like it's not like they're shying away from this idea that death is part of this revolutionary act, right? The revolution that they are trying to, or the struggle that they are trying to overcome. So even in these poems, I think that there's like a level of resilience and resolve that is involved. That I think like when you're writing a poem about protest, there needs to be those levels of resilience and resolve in this fight, because and this reality, right? It's a fight and it's also reality. Like we're not gonna, and even though there's room for the fantasy elements of it, which is where I do a lot of writing these days. But there's a dealing with reality here that I feel like galvanizes the people.
okay. All right. Thank you. Uh, Dean Jones, Miss Moore, you want to chime in?
Yeah, whatever they said. I think they both hit it right on the head as it relates when we talk about protest poetry, and it's one of the themes that I talk about in African American literature. And when we talk about what does that mean, what does protest mean? The breakdown, even the terminology. What is poetry and what is protest? And when those two are married, what does that mean for the African American experience and for the narrative itself? So that is a different way for us to verbalize, whether we verbalize it in rhyme, in rhythm, or in prose. A short synopsis of our point of view as to how this American experience is affecting us as Black people, as Black folk on this land that we were taken from the shores of West Africa and having to assimilate to. So when we protest against the things that through our words, we're essentially saying what Ms. Jones is saying. We're taking what they've given us and we're using it to our advantage to kind of put a mirror in front of their face to explain to them, like, look, okay, this is what you've given me, but in protest, this is why it's not working for me. We're using the tools that you gave me, the language that you gave me, the parameters of the language in poetry that you gave me through the sonnet and what have you. So I think it's beautiful that as African Americans that we could take the dynamics of different styles of writing, especially with poetry, because poetry tends to appeal to a broader audience as opposed to a narrative or a short story or something like that. It's a quick synopsis. It's a theatrical synopsis. It's a very engaging synopsis of my experience. Particularly like when Maya Angelou, who is a usual suspect in poetry, talked about the phenomenal woman, talked about her hips and how she she compared her hips to oil wells and things of that nature, the symbolism, all of the literary devices that we use to describe our experience in poetry. Similar to what Gil Scott Heron talked about, he wrote a poem about for Jose Campo Torres. It was a killing of that man. Pretty much what we're dealing with Mike Brown, Breonna Taylor, and all of that. So he talked about, I don't want to write no more poems like this. And then he goes into, the protest of what happened to how he was publicly, killed. And so, I think it's a beautiful way how we as African Americans on many levels, like we've done with everything, with fashion, with food, with everything, we've taken what they've given us. And we made it our own, but we also made it in a way where it can be a mirror in front of the face of society, like protest poetry. And so you can see, this is how I feel about my experience as an African American in this country. So what they said. Yes.
I think that's pretty much the icing on the cake after that, So thank you. Thank y'all so much for, your wonderful responses. Want to have you. All right. So we can go ahead and wrap up with that theme. All right. So the next thing we'll get into now is Black identities. So for the next poem we'll get into, it is called We Wear the Mask by Paul Laurence Dunbar. Octavia, let's see, where is Octavia? Octavia Calloway Peters, are you there? I think I saw you. If you're available, myself, she'll be one to read that poem. Okay, hi. I just saw you. Oh, here you go. Octavia, you ready?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm in the middle of doing my hair and it's almost done, so I don't want to turn on my camera because I'm a little unpresentable right now.
Okay.
Give me 1 second. Okay, I'm ready.
Okay.
We wear the mask. We wear the mask that grins and lies. It hides our cheeks and shades our eyes. This debt we pay to human gully, with torn and bleeding hearts we smile, and mouth with pirate subtleties. Why should the world be overwise in counting all our tears and sighs? Nay, let them see us. Let them see only us while we wear the mask. We smile, but oh great Christ, our cries to thee from tortured souls arise. We sing, but oh the clay is vile. Ouch. Beneath our feet and long the mile, but let the world dream otherwise. We wear the mask.
All right, and thank you so much, Octavia. And that was another member of the Word Movement, Octavia Heater. Thank you so much for that. So with that, this theme of Black identities. So the question becomes, with that, Paul Laurence Dunbar was a predecessor, in regards to having this notion of, African American identity, not being static and always evolving over time. So when we think of, other poets later, we can think of Clifton and Rollins and so on and so forth. This whole form of self-conception, basically, how this whole idea of the Black identity, how is that conceived nowadays compared to how it was back when Paul Laurence Dunbar wrote this poem?
Can I start?
Yeah.
Okay, so to your question, and you guys let me know if I'm lagging, but to your question, I don't think that there's, obviously there's some difference in today and when the poem was written, but at the same time, I think we as Black people still find ourselves wearing a certain mask in certain spaces where we feel like we have to hide our feelings or hide our emotions. I'm reminded of the concept that W.E. Du Bois came up with, he kind of coined double consciousness, this idea of wearing like a double veil, and so to speak. And so in certain spaces, maybe like if you're the only Black person, filled with, in a room filled with your white peers, maybe you feel the need to cover yourself in a way. Maybe you feel that you can't be Black. And so like this idea of Du Bois double consciousness, kind of veiling who you are, veiling your Black identity, is almost like you can't wait to get home, to tear off that whiteness and be Black.
That, you know what, Ms. Moore, I was thinking about Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man. The prologue talks about somewhat touches on that as well, about being in a lit room but still not being recognized. So I would think that we wear the mask now. You're absolutely right, that double consciousness. We wear the mask now is in the form of assimilation to me. So we are uncomfortably Black in a lot of places. We're not unapologetically Black. We're very uncomfortable with being Black. And so we assimilate. We put on a mask. We're not ourselves. Our pitch and tone of our voices are naturally vibrate at a higher level than other ethnic groups. I mean, there's studies on it that talks about the pitch and tone of Black people voices. And so we have learned how to change even the pitch and tone of our voices when we're around people who are not, us typically, code switching, wearing a mask, because I can't speak mine. I can't talk like I do with Ms. Moore outside of this Zoom meeting in front of. So, I think being Black in this country, like James Baldwin said, to be Black and to be conscious, that's a heavy, to be Black and be conscious, that's a level of trying to balance your sanity. So, we have come into this country wearing a mask, and how do we take it off? I don't know, but you have to be comfortable in your own skin. The other thing is that if we can't see a problem, we can't fix a problem. So a lot of us don't see a problem with the mask. They just think that's what you're supposed to do. And so we have normalized not being who we truly are. And so there is a conflict with realities of, if in fact, is this a mask, or this is just how the game's supposed to go. So, it's just an identity. It's just an identity crisis that Blacks were then going through, and we still are going through. To answer your question, Mr. Brackett, even now, but it hasn't evolved much. The characteristics of what that mask entails hasn't evolved much at all. It's just times have changed. We have social media now. That's another mask, because you can be anybody you want to be on social media, Black. Otherwise, you can be a Black power. I could be a Black activist on social media, but when I go to work, I better be docile Mikhail Jones, conservative Mikhail Jones. And I better put these nappy dreadlocks up in a nice little French bun, so I won't, aggravate the atmosphere of the room. So yes, it has evolved. It's still the same mask that he talked about. It just has evolved in different ways because we're in a different time.
Okay. Ashley, Jamon, y'all want to chime in?
Yeah, I was just thinking, and excuse the sunlight. The sun is moving across the sky, so I will have different orbs of light and shadow on me. But I was thinking about the double consciousness, W.E.B. Du Bois as well. But then I started thinking, are there examples of people who have shown us how we can maybe take off the mask, even though it does come at a risk to our careers and our livelihoods? So I started thinking about Gwendolyn Brooks and Toni Morrison, specifically Gwendolyn Brooks, who, won the Pulitzer early on and then shied completely away from the white publishing industry because she saw that it was, stealing her soul in a way. It wasn't allowing her to be honest to herself and to serve her people in a way that she wanted to. And she is hailed still as one of the greatest poets who ever lived, but she willfully took off that mask that the academy, the white academy, tried to give her. And that's a hard thing to do, for sure. I mean, we all are, trying to have our dream career as writers and as scholars and whatever. And sometimes that does mean, thank you, person who said they love my turban, I appreciate you. But yeah, sometimes that means that we have to literally become, blacklisted, so to speak. And Toni Morrison also I thought about because she consistently wrote only about Black characters. Her books did not privilege white people, white characters, whiteness, nothing about that. And she did also take a lot of flack for that as well. People constantly asked her, when are you going to write real books instead of just writing Black books? So it does come at a cost. And I think as time has moved on, a lot of us who are studying and have studied those people from the past, we are having to make those decisions now. Like, do I want to try to not wear this mask, or at least wear it in a slightly different way than those who came before me? Do I want to try to forge a new path? Or even thinking about somebody like Sonia Sanchez, who was never wearing a mask and has paid a price for that, as far as, sometimes having job security or just security period, what have you. If you watch her documentary, you'll see, so much of what she went through. And I mean, talking to her now, she's still like, she doesn't regret how she lived her life. She made a way for so many of us to be able to say what we want to say and still be employed. I think about her every single time I say something on social media, or I write a radical poem or whatever, and I'm still able to be employed the very next day. I feel like she is one of those people who made that possible for us. So yeah, I mean, we're definitely still wearing various masks in many, places. And I hope that, my grandchildren don't even know what a mask is, that they can just be, whatever they are. Whenever I have them many, many, many years from now. Don't even have regular kids yet. So, but yeah, that's just what I thought of.
Okay.
Right. I want to, first of all, regular kids is probably I don't have regular kids yet. I love that, Ashley. I want to piggyback kind of what they were saying, piggyback off of what they were saying in terms of the multiple different masks that are being worn. I got really excited when the poem started being read by Paul Laurence Dunbar, because we actually just in a program with the Flourish did work with high school students where we had them read that poem, Maya Angelou's poem, The Masks We Wear, and then they wrote their own poems about the masks that they feel they wear. And one of the things that I noticed about the poem is that the mask deals with a lot of different things. And when Paul Laurence Dunbar talks about this mask that grins and lies and smiles amidst all this pain, right? Part of the mask that really resonates with me is the way that he sets it up, and the way that I feel Maya Angelou sets it up in her poem that's based off of Paul Laurence Dunbar's, is the mask functions as this okayness with what's wrong with the world, and this kind of these wrong things are being done to me. However, I'm going to smile and act like I'm not in pain. And that's one of the biggest things I feel like about those two poems. And when we worked with the students, when I thought about Black identity, a lot of it is the code switching. And when you're in those spaces, like feeling like you have to act a different way. But a part of that code switching as well is the not speaking up or speaking out against. And I feel like there are ways in which that mask has been taken off time and time again when we look at protest movements, which kind of moves us back to like that struggle, the struggle for freedom that we talked about. But there are so many instances talking about masks today still. You can even look to Future, right? For those of y'all who listen to rap music, Future song Mask Off, like Mask Off, and that chorus deals with him opening up about his life and being like, okay, so on this song, I'm gonna take my mask off and talk about the problems I'm having with drug use. So even in this instance, I forget when Mask Off came out. I don't know. We've been bumping it for a couple years now. But even in this instance, when we're looking at trap music, even they're still talking about masks and talking about this idea of like, when you pull off the mask, there's a risk, right? There's a risk that you're taking and an amount of vulnerability that you're showing that historically Black people, and a lot of times, like in Paul Laurence Dunbar's case and Future's case, Black men have been shied away from showing vulnerability. So like that mask is like so important to us as Black men. Like we gotta have the mask on. We gotta close off in some way. We gotta put up the front instead of removing it and allowing ourselves to be vulnerable and to speak out when we feel like we've been hurt in some way.
Can I add something?
Sure.
Hey, this is Geraldine, and it's so great to see all of you guys. I have a master's in liberal studies from Ohio State, and I studied theater at Ohio State Communications, and I was in all the plays at school and used to do poetry and stuff. My old office at UC Berkeley was Sonia Sanchez's old office, if you could believe that. And I went to Paul Laurence Dunbar High School, so I'm all into this poetry stuff. I'm so excited about what I'm hearing. A little bit of housekeeping. Mikhail Shelja got kicked off. The power went out in her house, so you're the host. But we got everything okay. So just you be looking out for the waiting room. You're the host. And I see Josh Coleman on there. Hey, Josh. Hey. And so I'm really loving what I hear. So hey, old friend, when we're looking at the masks and maybe even blackness and thinking about how Zora Neale Hurston died poor, they had to take up a collection for her to even bury her. She had an unmarked, or grave site until Alice Walker came along and gave her a tombstone, and it said "The Genius of the South." And just, I don't know how many of you are on TikTok, but I'm on TikTok these days, and there's so many Black creators whose music or sounds or funny images and videos, they might post it and get 100 or 200 likes, and somebody else posts their content, gets 1 million likes, and those things translate into dollars and recognition. And so, it's still even happening today, even in our new forms of media. Black artists still need to fight for their own voice and their own recognition in the space.
And Mr. Brackett, I guess Dr. A.G. she said, this is Geraldine. That is Dr. A.G., our provost of Miles College. She slid in like she just, yeah. So we want to recognize her and her role at the institution and all that she does for us as well.
Well, right now I'm just a fan of the arts, and so I appreciate being a part of this and getting to hear you speak and getting to hear the students and their perspective on things. And I look forward to hearing much, much more. Thank you for putting this together, everyone.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. A.G. And that was the provost of Miles College. And it was so interesting. She actually shared in the chat his old office over at Berkeley, which I thought it was interesting, that kind of thing. All right, so I think this is a good point to actually transition over to the next theme. This talks about the Black experience in history and memory. All right, so we have the next poem, which is "The Negro Speaks of Rivers" by Langston Hughes. Desmond Austin will be the reader. He is the president of the Golden Word Movement. Phenomenal person, phenomenal guy. I'm definitely excited to hear from him. Let's see. Desmond, are you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
All right.
Do I have to turn my camera on or?
Yeah, turn your camera on.
All right, got you. My camera kind of messed up, so just bear with me.
Okay.
All right. The Negro speaks of rivers, Langston Hughes. I've known rivers. I've known rivers ancient as the world and older than the flow of human blood and human veins. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. I bathed in the Euphrates when dawns were young. I built my hut near the Congo and it lulled me to sleep. I look upon the Nile and I raise the pyramids above it. I heard the singing of the Mississippi when Abe Lincoln went down to New Orleans, and I've seen its muddy bosom turn all golden in the sunset. I've known rivers, ancient, dusky rivers. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. The Negro Speakers of the Rivers by Langston Hughes. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Desmond. And like I say, he is the president of the Golden Word Movement. So thank you so much for reading that poem for us. All right. So
thanks for having me.
Oh, no problem. No problem. All right. So now the question is, now that we heard that poem from him, so basically, we're going back to the anthology that was published, this whole reason why we had this program in the first place. One of the sessions was actually called Ideas of Ancestry. So when we think about, the poem that we just heard, what sort of ideas as far as African or even African-American ancestry was put forward with poems such as this?
Mr. Braga, could you ask that question again?
Yeah, so basically the session, as far as the anthology, the whole reason why we had this program in the first place, it's called Ideas of Ancestry. So what sort of ideas as far as African or even African-American ancestry was put forward with poems such as The Negro Speakers of Rivers?
I'm gonna try to answer because I just had an idea as you asked the question again. I think something that's interesting about that poem and others like it is that it positions us as having like an infinite history in a way that our capture and transport to this country doesn't necessarily allow. Usually we think, oh, we were brought over here, that's when our history started. We, as far as we can think back is slavery, that's who we were, et cetera, et cetera. But a poem like this makes us realize that our history actually extends much, much, much further back, and that our people are not just, those who were taken and those who were forced to endure the American terrorism of slavery. So I really love that idea of how expansive we can be in both our present, our future, and also in our past.
I was going to, the phrase that popped up in my head was transatlantic power line. Like this like idea that we, with poems such as these, where they're jumping across the Atlantic in a way and connecting us back to Africa, where originally that was one of the biggest goals in terms of slavery was social death, and trying to remove this idea of ancestry from the African now brought to America, right? This African American, one of the biggest things was removing that history, because in a way you were able to take power from them. And in this poem, and in so many poems like this, they work as claims of power and claims of ancestry, where we have the opportunities to create, because the way that I always think of it is, because the ties aren't necessarily there in history books or in textbooks, it then falls on us. We have the opportunity to create those ties. We have the opportunity to forge that connection between the two. And that's one of the most amazing things about the artist in this way, is that we're able to in essence write back histories that were attempted unsuccessfully, attempted to be taken from us, and are able to recognize that not only in the connection between Africa and America, but also across the diaspora. And there are so many examples, interesting examples of that throughout literature and art. It's really fun to like go in and like search like people who are doing that type of work and what they're creating in attempts to find that ancestry.
I want to add, to Jamon's response, that yes, we find a lot of ways to write back. Specifically, my favorite way for us, the way we've been writing back, and my favorite things to read. I like to read Black authors who write science fiction and magic realism, and that's one of the ways we. And I know Mr. Brackett shares these. we kind of we like to send abstracts to conferences about Black sci-fi. So I think this is one of the best ways to respond, because it shows a lot of those authors show that when we write back, we respond with our African roots. We do respond with those religious tones that came from Africa. We do that in those works. Another thing I wanted to mention was that just like what one of the other speakers said, that poem itself, it does incorporate all historical experience. It's very deep, and it shows that the Black culture identity is deep as well. It's very continuous. The entire history of Black people, that's what it includes for me. And so when the poem mentions the Nile, it lets me know, and it has like little hints of Africa in there. It's authentic in a way, and so that it's not romanticizing that part of Africa. It doesn't forget the concepts of slavery, and it doesn't romanticize that. It doesn't romanticize the fact that we didn't go through something. If that makes any sense.
Okay.
Can I add to that, Mr. Brackett?
Sure.
Ms. Moore definitely kind of picked up on one of the points I was going to make in terms of like how deep our ancestry runs. And while Mr. Cloud was reading that poem, I thought about Alice Walker's Everyday Use, and how there's always been like this rift among African Americans about which heritage do we embrace. Do we embrace our African American heritage or Southern heritage, or do we go back to our roots per se, and what are those roots? So that's one of the things I was thinking about, and just the fact that Hughes related our ancestry to rivers. I mean, that's how deep it runs, and that's how hard it is to trace. And so that's just one of the things I was thinking about when he read that. So just wanted to share that.
That's a really good point you made, Ms. Gomes, as it relates to our idea of which ancestry do we tie back to. The idea of our ancestry, and in that particular piece that that Langston Hughes talked about the rivers, I think it's important that he was very deliberate. We know that Hughes was a very deliberate writer. So whatever subliminal messages he put in there, they was for a specific reason. And so in that, he tied us back to the continent of Africa, and then the particular rivers, the waters, the metaphorical, the symbolism of the waters traveling. We know the Nile is one of the longest rivers in the world. So the waters traveling, taking us to different places and taking our ancestry into different directions. I think is important. The idea of our ancestry has evolved with the oral tradition, with the music from the folklore tales, from the spirituals to all of the things. They have evolved with in our role, and that has evolved. So, but somehow I believe that there is a population of us who have held on to the authenticity of that ancestry. And then you have the other population who holds on to an ideal romantic version of that Ms. Moore was talking about. And we can see that oftentimes for many of the students that's on here that talk that have taken EN 101, there is a story there called The Wife of His Youth by Charles W. Chestnut. And in that story, he disconnects from who his true ancestor. He creates a whole romantic, fantasized world of this light-skinned and blue-vein society of people where, you know, and this is what he's created. This is his reality. This is his connection. This is his world until it collides, until that reality collides with the reality that we create. And I think right now that is the serious conflict that many of us are having with that is being published. Not just, you know, because we know that the African Americans, your writings, but you got your music, you got dance, you got theater, you have movies now. And so we see a disconnect somehow in that. But I think it's very important. The idea of ancestry is always going to be prevalent, whether it's romanticized or whether it's addressed directly in whatever we do or whatever we produce as Black people and give it back to the world.
And it's funny that Dean Jones starts speaking about, you know, music and so on and so forth, because that is actually the next theme that we actually get into. So foreshadowing much, right? Then, like I said, the next theme is Black language and music. And so the next poem we'll get into is by Kate Rushin. It's called The Black Backups. Alexandria will be the reader from that. She is our secretary of the Golden Word Movement. Alexandria, are you ready? No, she was having a little bit of technical difficulties earlier. I was trying to make sure she actually got it. Alexandria, are you ready?
I'm still trying to get it together. Hold on, just give me a moment.
Okay.
Can anybody hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, cool.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, cool.
Yep.
All right, I'm ready. Go ahead, show myself. All right. How's everybody doing?
We're good.
So the poem I got here is called The Black Backups. This is dedicated. Okay, never mind. Okay. I said, hey, babe, take a walk on the wild side. I said, hey, babe, take a walk on the wild side. And the colored girls say, do, 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 ooh. This for my great grandmother Esther, my great grandmother Addie, my grandmother called sister, my great aunt Rachel, my aunt Hilda, my aunt Tan, my aunt Brenda, my aunt Gladys, my aunt Helen, my aunt Allie, my cousin Barbara, my cousin Dottie, and my great great aunt Vinnie. This is a dedication to all the Black women riding on buses and subways back and forth in the midline, Heddle Fields, Cherry Hills, and Chevy Chase. This for the women who spend their summers in Rockport, Newport, Cape Cod, and Camden, Maine. This is for the women who open those burdens of dirty laundry sent home from the ivy-covered campuses. My great aunt Rachel worked for the Carters ever since I can remember. There was a boy whose name I never knew, and there was a girl whose name was June.
Okay.
And that's it.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much.
Yes, sir.
So So that was the Black Backups from Kate Russian. So this is a little bit different, right? Now we're getting into, Black music, Black language, so on and so forth. So there are poems such as these that actually have adopted techniques borrowed from, genres of music and so on and so forth. So what passages, as far as, sound, rhythm, can you really, experience more vividly, or what stood out as far as, sounds or rhythm within the poem?
Well, I'm going to jump in because I think I'm the oldest person on this panel. There is a tune in there, do 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 do. Take a walk on the wild side. I think that is, if I'm not, is that Bob Dylan? Somebody please fact check me. I heard that rhythm in there. Was that Bob Dylan? Somebody fact check me. Do 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 do. Take a walk on the wild side. It may not. I'm not sure. Somebody, please fact check me. But the rhythm. So to answer your question, ask your question again, Mr. Brackett, because I want to make sure I answer that correctly.
I see Lou Reed.
It's who?
Lou Reed.
It was Lou Reed?
Yes, ma'am. It's from Lou Reed.
Okay, take a walk on the wild side. Yes. Okay, so ask your question again. I want to make sure I answer that correctly. I'm sorry, Mr. Brackett.
No problem. So basically, we notice how some poems adopt techniques basically borrowed from, genres of music. So basically, we was talking about, how certain passages may have stood out because of, incorporating artistry with sound or rhythm. How, what experience did you, remember vividly from those passages? Why did it stand out for you?
Okay, so that stood out to me because, the music, the rhythm, the passages, the sounds, they emphasize the message and what is being said in the works. And so, the beats, the vibrations, all of that kind of emphasize and puts, a stress on that. And so that it always stands out to me, not just with that piece, but with there are other pieces that, are used now. When we talk about rap, rap is a form of poetry, and they sample stuff all the time in rap, and to emphasize, a message. Case in point, Jay-Z, when he did, what was that piece? He used Nina Simone's For Little Girls as an intro, and then he went on. That was deliberately done to emphasize the message behind what he was going to say in that particular rap. And so, I use it in my own work, in my own poetry. Sometimes I will use a spiritual or something like that to introduce, to set a tone and a mood and an experience for the reader, so they can really kind of get the idea of what is being said in the words. So I think it's very important, and it's very impactful for a reader as well, as the listener.
Okay.
Going back to what Ms. Jones said about how rappers and artists do tend to take from either a poem or they sample even somebody speaking. I think it was I can't remember which song by Beyonce, but she actually used, I think, Malcolm X's, one of his excerpts in one of her songs when she did the Lemonade album, talking about how Black women are the most disrespected being on the planet. And she was doing it, I can't remember the song, but I know her song was talking about how she got hurt and all of that. She used that to make everything stand out and make everything come together.
Okay. Ms. Moore, you say he's going to reference the story of OJ? Uh-oh.
Yeah, well, she talking about the Jay-Z. I guess she's talking about what he said. I'm not Black, I'm OJ. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm not Black, I'm OJ. Okay.
Okay. Ashley, Jamon, you want to chime in?
Sure. I was thinking about as the poem was being read, and then after hearing the question, I sort of took it in a different direction because for me, I think all of us who are Black know we have a certain sort of rhythm and swing just in the way that we exist in the world. And so I started thinking back, like, when did I first realize that was a thing that I could harness myself? And I went all the way back to little 7-year-old Ashley in the 2nd grade and reading this book called Honey, I Love by Eloise Greenfield, a book of poems about Blackness. And I remember when I had an assignment to recite the poem Harriet Tubman, and I just felt filled with this same sort of music, even though it wasn't music, it was, a poem, but the sort of swing that I had observed or had heard other Black people in my family or in life have. So like thinking back to listening to my grandmother, talk or laugh, there was a certain swing to it. Hearing me and my mom and my sisters talk, or my dad and my brother, whatever. There's just a certain music that's inherent in us. And so I just started thinking about how that is true no matter what art form we're doing, or even if we're not even doing art. Sometimes you can see somebody, I know for me, I'll just take it to me, you can see a Black man walking down the street and you can just see the music, that whole spirit all over him, just inherently. And so I think it's inevitable that it would seep into our work. And of course, it does something for you when you hear it, like in the poem we just looked at, which I'm excited to read again, actually. I had never seen that poem before. And I really like what it's doing with the like song in the middle of it. But it brings about like a familiarity for those of us who already know the song. If we know the music of being Black, we're like, okay, yeah, I hear that, I understand it. But it's also just expressing something that's hard to contain in just regular words. Which maybe could be said about Blackness in general. It can't really be contained in anything except the experience itself.
I'm excited to hear Ashley use the term swing because myself, and with my poetry background and history, I never took a poetry course. Not even when you think of your famous white poet authors who they teach in schools. I don't know what my school system was doing, but I ain't read poems. So I had no terminology when I was writing. And one of the phrases that often I would try and impart upon my students was like swing. I was like, oh, you gotta have a swing. Like that was the way that I described it as well. And that's what I feel when I hear poets as well, Black poets as well. Like I'm listening, and when I'm reciting it, I'm looking for what the swing is of that poem and how that poem has, in essence, a musicality to it. And I think that is so important. It's one of those things I always tell people when they're writing as well. Whenever you're producing any art, it's important to look towards other genres, right? It's important to look towards other genres and see the ways in which they're creating their art and how that can influence yours. So when you look to poetry, especially when you look into poetry towards the 20s, 30s, there's you can see the jazz influences, right? Of the music at the time. When you look at poetry today, you can see the influence from music of today. And Dr. Jones, I believe it was, had mentioned earlier, the music is poetry. The lyrics within the music is poetry. That's what they're writing. When we referenced Future earlier and it's on Mask Off, it was an example of poetry that exists within the framework of music, and they go hand in hand.
All right. Thank y'all so much. And that was actually some great insight on as far as the music and so on and so forth. And it is my first time actually hearing that poem, actually having music incorporated in the writing style. So I'm definitely going to look back into that, just to show that relationship between poetry and music, lyricism, that kind of thing. All right. So last but not least, we have the last theme to go over. It is family and community. family and community. So we will be looking into Nikki Rosa by none other than Nikki Giovanni. So we have Miss Jayla, who is chaplain for the Golden Word Movement. She'll be reading that. You ready, Jayla?
Yes, I am. Hello, everyone. Nikki Rosa. Childhood remembrances are always a drag. If you are Black, you always remember things like living in Woodlawn with no inside toilets. And if you become famous or something, they never talk about how happy you were to have your mother all to yourself and how good the water felt when you got your bath from one of those big tubs that folk in Chicago barbecue in. And somehow when you talk about home, it never gets across how much you understood their feelings. As the whole family attended meetings about Hollydale, and even though you remember, your biographers never understand your father's pain as he sells his stock and another dream goes. And through you are poor, it isn't poverty that concerns you. And though they fought a lot, it isn't your father's drinking that makes any difference, but only that everyone is together and you and your sister have happy birthdays and very good Christmases. And I really hope no white person ever has cause write about me, because they never understand. Black love is Black wealth. And they'll probably talk about how hard my childhood was and never understand that, all while I was quite happy. Nikki Giovanni.
Thank you, Jayla. Like I said, she is the chaplain of the Golden Word Movement. So thank you so much for the reading of that poem. So final question for as far as, all the things that, we went over. So Nikki Giovanni makes the point that African-American lives are often misunderstood by those who are not Black. So what in this poem could be misunderstood and why?
All of what she said could be misunderstood. And I'm gonna tell you why, because if you'd ever had that experience, you just wouldn't understand, particularly if you're non-Black. Okay, yeah, so the Black experience is often, it's always misunderstood. Not often, it's always misunderstood. There's no way you can understand the Black experience if you're not Black. I'm sorry. It's no way, because our experience is unique. It's unique in history. Nobody came to this country the way we did. Nobody on this earth looks like us. Nobody. Okay, so our experience is unique. So my vantage point of how I navigate through this society or through this world as a global citizen is going to be unique compared to someone from a homogeneous society like an Asian culture or someone who is non-Black, who can easily assimilate and mainstream into European culture. So it's just going to be different. All of what she said can be misconstrued as it depends on who you're reading it to, what audience, what type of poverty porn mindset they in at that particular day when they hear what she's saying. Like, oh my God, she had such a hard life. She had to bathe in a tub that they cooked in as well. Oh my God. Those could be wonderful times. I remember when we had a screen door and the screen was off and the screen would fly off and flies and fly. I wish I had one of those screen doors now, but I got French doors, so for someone else that may be, you know, a hard time, but those were the good old days, you know. So I just think our experience is so important for us as African Americans to control our narrative. It is so important to not turn over our narrative and the translation of our narrative for someone else. It is so important that we preserve that and we translate it correctly so that it can be archived the way with authenticity. And I'm a big advocate of that. And when I look at the literature of people like George Moses Horton, who was the first African American to publish poetry in the South, when you look at his work and then you try to see, well, why was some of his work, you know, some of it was a little romanticized about the experience, and then he has some other protest pieces as well, but you have to see, well, was this narrative manipulated? Who was translating this? What did it mean to the person who was publishing it? Because we didn't have the power to publish the word. That was turned over to the oppressor. So it just depends, you know, but I think it's no way, everything she said in that poem, and I love Nikki Giovanni, she's my soror, Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Corporate. I've had an opportunity to meet Nikki Giovanni, and I know she's very matter of fact about whatever she's saying does. But yes, I think it could be misconstrued because our experience is just unique. It is like none other. And you can probably empathize with it, you could probably embrace it, but to understand it, you would have to be Black.
I want to jump on that point. Dr. Jones is, first of all, over here preaching. Over here preaching. And I think of how Blackness in and of itself, because I'm like, all of this could be misunderstood. And I think part of it is because the people around us, right? The people who aren't Black, who don't get it, they want some sort of, there's a need to like define, right? And when you think of, I always like break down that word, like define. Definite. That's the opposite of infinite, right? And there's an infinite possibility to Blackness. So they'll read the poem and they'll be like, oh, or they'll do this. This is one of the things that people love to do. They'll say, oh, so you must, being poor must have been the best thing ever. Or they'll turn around and flip it like that, make this definite idea. Or they'll be like, oh, this one person said this thing about being rich, so all y'all want to be rich, right? Or this person said slavery wasn't that bad, so slavery must have never been that bad for nobody, right? And all of these times there's this idea of, okay, because you said it, this is the representative for everybody, right? This is the representative for everybody, and also this is now definite. Like, this is how we're defining things from now on. Whereas one of the things that we understand as Black folk, and I don't know what words I can say and can't, so I'll say my favorite phrase, I'll say it in clean version, Negroes are nothing if not resourceful, all right? One of the things that we understand is no matter the situation, there's a need, we'll be able to adjust and be able to see things in a different light. We're often put in situations where we're adjusting and seeing how things can operate in different ways. Like, okay, I know you said this, but you meant this, right? We talk about signifying and things such as that. And a lot of times other cultures, they don't deal with it in the same way. So they're like, oh, this is definite. This has one meaning, one thing, da, 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 da. Our people are the master of the double entendre, right? We're the master of saying things that have multiple meanings. And because of that, we are often misunderstood because people are often trying to put into a box this Blackness that is Blackness, right? This infinite possibility that is us.
I think also going along with that, people don't necessarily understand that we have a capacity for joy despite everything that has been put upon us. I mean, just because obviously I've never been enslaved, I don't claim to know that experience, but I know for a fact, even in those conditions, people had to find ways to have joy. And the experience of the slave is something, again, I will never understand, but I certainly am not going to misunderstand it as, you know, that there was nothing in those people's lives that they could smile about, despite, again, this terror that they were going through. And then with Nikki Giovanni specifically, I've only met her one time and saw her read once live in life, which literally like broke my whole brain open. But she is one of the most, like, how do I say, she's impossible to misunderstand. That's the only way I can say that. Like, if you've ever seen her live or heard her talk, you cannot misunderstand what she is saying to you. However, I think back to that night when I saw her read in Birmingham, and I could tell just like the vibe in the room, there was two different wavelengths there. All the Black people understood everything she was saying. I mean, she was going off. Again, if you've ever heard her speak, this woman does not hold anything back, okay? Like, she's going off on everybody. The Black people were like, okay, yeah, like into it. And you could feel everybody else kind of be like, ooh, is she angry? Is she, what, does she hate us? Like, we knew what she was talking about, but they had no idea how to tap into the wavelength that she was on, that we were on with her. And I think like what the other two panelists were saying, we just are not the same as others. We have a unique experience. I think it's what Dean Jones was saying. Also, I love your last name, Dean Jones. It's a fantastic last name.
Actually belongs to my ex-husband.
Uh-oh.
I would like to add, and I'm going to turn my camera off so that my internet is not lagging. Let me just turn my camera off so it's a little bit better. So I'd like to add that, yeah, I like the way the poem kind of takes the argument that white society tends to misrepresent Black culture or Black experiences. And that's because that society focuses so much on narratives of hardship and poverty. But at the same time, I don't hear like this particular for one, we can't always assume that the speaker in the poem is the same speaker, is the same as the author. We have to just, you know, you can't just make that assumption that the author of the poem is also the speaker in the content of the poem itself. So with that being said, while the speaker is making this argument, and while this argument is still prevalent today, I feel like we could probably be a little more vigorous with this same argument and apply it to film that we see. Because if you notice that film that deal with Black society, Black culture, whatever, it still romanticizes the hardship and the poverty as if we are content with this idea of being the happy slave, you know, and that's historically the happy slave. That is the mammy figure with Tyler Perry. I love him to death, but I mean, come on now, you know. And so we are still pushing these narratives, you know. So I just don't want to get on this panel and be like, oh, you know, we have, you know, we've overcome this, and we haven't. And I'm glad that, you know, I'm glad writers like Giovanni are writing about this. I'm glad that we're on this panel discussing it, because conversation to me is the necessary first step, you know, and in order to break that concept of the happy slave, the matriarch, the welfare mother, you know, this idea that we are happy where we are. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, Ms. Moore, you know, Spike Lee did a movie called Bamboozle, which kind of brought to light the caricatures that, you know, were demonized by Black people. The Man, Step and Fetch It, you know, Birth of the Nation. They just, you know, made it seem like the happy slave. We were okay with being in the quarters and being raped and disenfranchised and all of that. But you're absolutely right. Tyler Perry, you know, he has made billions off the caricature. Yes.
And that's what allows for our continued oppression, honestly, for people to be able to say, oh, well, y'all are okay. You're fine being in this situation, or y'all were fine being slaves, because whatever. And yeah, like I said, I mean, we're so full of multitudes. Like people like to, as Jaman was saying, define it as, oh, so you're happy right now, so that means this is a good situation. Not true, like at all. I mean, I have joy today, but also I'm sick of what's going on, in the time. So yeah, this is exactly right. Conversation is absolutely the place to start with figuring out these things.
Yeah, like joy is not a substitute for justice. Like that's one thing I just like, just because we was happy when we was saying this thing, we were joyous in this, don't mean we like, oh yeah, we cool with being slave. Like that's not a substitute. You can't just try and point to this instance and be like, well, because you was smiling, I mean, I was thinking about, in this slavery, but because you were singing, we gonna keep it going for a few more years. That's one of the things that I really can't stand. I can't stand it at all. Like joy is not a substitute for justice. We can showcase, like you were just saying, we can showcase those multitudes, and they do exist, and making sure people recognize that. Making sure people recognize they want to try and erase the nuance that we have as a people, when that's just not the case.
May I say something?
Yes.
How y'all doing? My name is Allison Sims. I'm a Miles College theater major. And this takes me on to what Nina Simone once said, it's the artist's duty to reflect on the times, meaning that it's our job to reflect on the times. I've never been a big fan of slavery movies, but it is a part of our history so we can understand. That brings me to the fact of, have y'all ever seen the film Harriet Tubman with Janelle Monáe? I kind of had mixed feelings about that, but I had to watch it the second time to understand where the writer and where the producer was coming from on an instance where they wanted to show more of a substance of, I guess, Black essence throughout the film instead of bringing so much sorrow and pain throughout it. Because a lot of films that you see with slavery, you always seeing somebody getting beat on, you always seeing somebody getting raped. But this Harriet Tubman movie really didn't show any of those parts of abuse. So I was just saying, I was just agreeing on what y'all was saying, but that's all I got to say.
All right. And with that, that pretty much wraps up, all the themes that, we pretty much went over for the anthology, or basically the Lift Every Voice program. We do have room for a couple of questions. So if you do have a question, just type in the chat and I can just read it off to the panelists. And we'll just go on from there. So we'll just wait for a little bit for anyone that does have a question, whether it's about particular poems or about certain things that we went over, or certain comments that a panelist had made or anything. We'll just wait for a little bit for that.
I would encourage everybody to watch Bamboozled. For real, like that movie is one of my favorite movies ever for so many reasons. I mean, of course, Spike Lee, we could talk for hours about Spike Lee and his potential problematic nature. Yeah. We don't have time for that though, but I love that movie. Not only because it has one of my imaginary husbands in it, Savion Glover, oh my gosh, I love him, but also the movie itself and all the themes that it shows us is definitely, important. And regarding the Harriet Tubman movie too, I don't know why I have mixed feelings about it exactly. I think, Allison, you definitely articulated it better than I can, but I definitely felt kind of like, I don't know about it, but I don't really know why.
We actually have a question quick. This is to the students. For those students that are listening in, so how do you actually get into the creative process as far as creating art, whether it's visual art, writing, music and so on and so forth. Like, what is your process as far as getting into creating something? And this for any students that's on Zoom call. Anybody?
When I get into my creative process, it depends on what I'm doing. If, let's say, if I'm painting, I kind of visualize what I want because it's always something abstract and it always ends up something different. If I'm writing my poetry, sometimes I go back to past experiences. Sometimes I go off of music or just a random thought in my head and kind of make something out of nothing.
Cool. All right. Anybody else? Okay. All right. Awesome. Is Dina Dadabo still on the call? I don't know if she left or not. I wanted to give her an opportunity to speak before we wrap everything up. Did she go to a meeting? I thought I saw her.
No, I don't see Dina Dadabo on here. She was here.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
Sorry,
there she is. There she is.
Okay.
So, what I truly enjoyed it. Did you have a question? I had to rush from my other laptop here.
Oh, we were just we're basically just wrapping up. So just leaving you the opportunity, for any comments or.
Okay, I think this has really been wonderful. I want to thank all of you. You all know I'm really a fan of Africana literature. And let me see if I can do my video here so I'm not like you can't see me. Okay. I'm using my husband's at this time. So this is such a wonderful experience. I really think I want to thank all of you who have participated. These are the types of things I really think that we need to do on a more regular level, basis in different ways from not just Black History Month is what I want to say, that we do it, if it's a monthly thing or I know bi-weekly, that's a bit much. Even 3 times a semester is wonderful. So I want to thank you all. I want to thank Mr. Brackett, who reached out, I guess, for this grant, to get this grant. And of course, I listened to all your comments. I mean, it just makes my heart glad that we're having this type of deep discussions about identity. Thank you so much.
All right. So with that, thank you so much, Dina Dadabo, for your wonderful comments. And like I said, we are recipients of this Lift Every Voice grant. So this is just the first half, basically in covering, aspects of African American poetry. Our second program will be in 2021, the early parts. So definitely look out for that. This time it's going to be a little bit different. We're actually planning to have a poetry slam. So with that, look out for information as far as how to sign up and so on and so forth, because I definitely want to send an invite to not only our Miles College students, but to the community as well, to help participate in this wonderful slam. I want to thank everybody on the panel, Jamon, Ashley Jones, Miss Moore had to leave, and I know Dean Jones had to leave as well. Because of other meetings and so on and so forth. But I want to thank everyone that joined in on this call. Thank you to the students, faculty, and staff that joined in on this call as well. Let this not be the only time we actually have deep conversations about poetry, African American literature, or even African American identity. Discussions such as this. This is how we keep the culture alive. So with that, thank y'all so much for joining in. And with that, y'all have a great evening and have a great Thanksgiving break. All right. Thank you all.